You can get Sons of Patriarchy completely ad-free on Apple Podcasts for $4.99 per month or $44.99 per year. This applies to our entire back catalog and every upcoming episode completely ad-free. Listening without interruption. If you don't mind the ads, you can still listen to the series for free on any of your favorite podcast platforms. This revenue helps support Outreach Idaho and helps pay the bills of the series. Now, on to the episode. Quick announcement before we start this episode. We've launched our website and initial line of merch. Go to sonsofpatriarchy.com and pick up a t-shirt, a sticker, or a crew neck fleece, or all three. And wait till you see our design. We went bold. A link to the website is in our show notes, or simply type sonsofpatriarchy.com into your search bar. Now, on with today's conversation. All right, we have our third in the line of those who are coming out to speak out both against and exposing Heritage, CPC, Covenant Presbyterian Church, Marion Levitt, and so much more. So I'll start by asking for your name and a broad picture about your church journey, what that looked like, and how you ended up at Heritage CPC and the Covenant Presbyterian Church, just in general.
Okay. My name's Alexandra Yaroslan. I sort of grew up in the church. My parents were, I think, saved pretty early on. I think I was like maybe 6 months. I might have been 2 years old. I can't remember which.
Yep. You're not expected to remember when you're 2 years old.
Yeah. All I remember is that I was baptized in the Catholic Church culturally from my mom's side, and then my parents got saved after that, and then I think we went through some like non-denominational churches. I again can't really remember. I remember around 4 years old, I think 4 or 5, I want to say, we attended this thing called the Master's Mission. And I think it was based in North Carolina, I want to say. And that's, I think, where at least from what I can tell, I think where my family kind of started going down the fundamentalist road. That trip in particular, I think, is when they started spanking us like a lot more and a lot more religiously. And it was, yeah, that was traumatizing.
Yep.
So, so I was, we were in Illinois for a while. That's where I was raised. And then at around age 8, my family moved to Arizona because they wanted to get away from extended family drama and all of that, which feels kind of ironic given what ends up happening with me.
True.
The first couple churches, I think, were just like college churches because we had moved to like the Mesa Tempe area in Phoenix or in Arizona. And then we started getting more into like the Presbyterian stuff when we we didn't join the OPC. We tried to join the OPC. But I think we left because my dad was not happy that they did not do communion for children. So
yeah, paedo communion. Yep.
Yeah, or at least we were like under the bar, and I can't remember, like we were under the age. And so then I want to say we might have stopped going to church for like a month or two. I'm not sure. But then we started going to the CRAC church in Phoenix. And that was, the pastors were Jeff Neal and Richard Claus. That church no longer exists anymore. But that's actually where I met Gabrielle and her now husband. So we've known each other since, I think she was like 9 years old, and I think I was probably about 11. So we've gone through this journey a bit together. We were actually kind of an active family in the CRAC church. I remember we would do like the greetings on Sunday and handing out the bulletins, and we would host fellowships all the time. There was actually this one time where we We had, I think, like 40 people over at our house, and the night before, our neighbors got like swatted or something, and so we were like out on the street at like 1 o'clock in the morning because there were helicopters and the police escorted us out of the house. And the
Oh,
next day,
literally, like was SWAT. I thought SWAT like was colloquial for something else, but the SWAT
yeah,
was actually there.
I know we
Okay.
had a sniper on our roof, like on our garage
Okay. Okay.
roof, and my dad was like,
Yeah.
"Why is there a man with a gun on our roof?"
Like
And
those are the questions you don't ask.
yeah. So yeah, so and like the next day we ended up having like 40 people over. So we were like very involved. Like we just really liked having people over and doing stuff. Me, my mother, and my brother all cleaned at the church for free. We would have to walk like I think 15 minutes down the road every week to go clean the church. Which looking back now is a little weird because it's like the free labor was interesting considering our family was not very well off.
Hmm.
I think that people knew that too. And we didn't have a second car, so we had to walk to clean every time. And none of the staff, I don't think, ever offered to like pick us up or drive us over there. I know that was a weird aspect of that church that really sticks out to me. Anyway, so the church fell apart when I was about 13 years old, I think. I don't really remember much of it because I was actually in Illinois with my mom and my brother and my dad sometimes because my grandmother was, she was dying. And so we were up in the hospital with her for months on end. Um, and then by the time we came back, I think we had already planned on moving. I don't know if we had a plan on exactly where we were going. But we eventually decided on Tennessee. And we used the inheritance money from my grandmother's passing and bought a property that was, I think, like 15 minutes away from Heritage.
Hmm.
And we were planning on doing the whole agrarian farmer thing and doing the like self-sustaining stuff. And we got there, and my dad ended up having some back problems, and I was chronically ill. I had actually been chronically ill like a year prior to that. And so my health was starting to deteriorate once we got there. And um, yeah, and we were not very involved in the community. We would go to church, once a week. And we didn't really attend many like gatherings and stuff like that. That's when kind of the problems in my house, I feel like, got more obvious. My mother started a drinking problem, and my parents were fighting all the time, and it was just a very lonely and stressful time in my life. Um, but I think about 2 years into living there, my dad started having some problems with the leadership, and he he didn't really like have any specific problems that I can recall. He just didn't like the vibe. Um, and he didn't like the fact that they didn't drink alcohol a lot, which was really weird. Like that was his complaint, was that they didn't sit around talking about theology and drinking alcohol.
Hmm.
And it was like, well, these people are like they're farmers and they're busy and they probably don't want to get trashed on the weekends, considering they're working outside all the time.
Yep.
So we ended up moving back to Arizona, and we joined a startup CPC church called Trinity. And that's where Gabrielle and her now husband, they also were attending there too. And church did not last very long. I don't remember all the ins and outs, but I think the candidate pastor, he was a little bit unhinged. He there was something weird about him. I don't know what he was on, but he like lied all the time, and I think people suspected that he had like a drinking problem. He was just super not. He was not very empathetic towards his wife. There was one time where he had her host the entire church, I think about a week after she had a double mastectomy for breast cancer.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was funny because I'm pretty sure that my parents were like, Kevin's like weird. He shouldn't have done that. But they didn't say anything to him. Like, I feel like that would have been like, hey, dude, how about we cool it on the having people over right now so your wife can, like, get the bed rest that she needs.
Yep.
But yeah, no. So that church didn't last very long. There were just way too many extremists in like a very small container, and we left before it totally blew up. But then I think it did really blow up after we left. So after that, we kind of hopped around churches. We were no longer really talking to any of the people that we actually came back for. So we were again in this like weird limbo, lonely spot where we weren't really in community. And we were going to like Baptist churches and stuff. And my dad does not like Baptist people. And so, everyone felt like he was just making fun of the pastor or the singing or just anything. And then after a while, we just stopped going to church entirely because my dad's back issue got too bad, and I started having non-epileptic seizures. And so it wasn't working, and my mom did not want to go to church by herself. I think the emphasis on the patriarchal stuff was kind of killed her confidence to be able to go and interact with people because there's just, I don't know, my father talked down to her a lot, and I don't think that she thought she was smart. And it was really sad. But anyway, so we didn't really have a church. My brother and I, however, would fly out to Tennessee once or twice a year to go visit Heritage and go visit our friends there and stuff. So for a while, that was pretty much the only like consistent community we had was Heritage, but from, several thousand miles away. And then I think it was early 2020. It was right after COVID hit. I found out that Jeff Durbin's church was right down the road from us because they had moved locations. And so I was like, hey, why don't we go to church? Because like I was hoping that if we went to church, then maybe we could have some like oversight and people could talk about my mom's alcohol problem. But that didn't really work out in my favor. So so it was just me, my mom, and my brother all going to Apologia, and my father, I don't believe, ever attended the entire time that I lived with him, which, to be fair, was only a couple months that we were actually going there. But they would like not go if I didn't go. It was very weird. Like for people who were like all gung ho about the church, it was like, but you'll only go if the girl having seizures goes with you. It just felt really disheartening. So that was pretty much it as far as like how my church history was up until everything kind of got fucked up.
Yep. So what were your first impressions of the CPC, Heritage or the church in Arizona? What was it like going from the CRAC and many other church denominations and backgrounds to the CPC? What was that like?
Honestly, they all felt really similar to me.
Okay.
The CRAC and the CPC especially they were very similar. It just kind of felt like the CPC was a little bit more on the conservative side. Not saying that the CRAC was liberal in any sense.
I was about to say this.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure both are very conservative.
No,
Yeah.
but it was more, it's like, they're kind of more uptight about things, and things
Okay.
they probably should have been uptight about too. I feel like there was definitely more of a culture of drinking in the CRAC that was not really present in the CPC. And there was this like glorification of alcohol a lot in the CRAC. they like to talk about being righteously buzzed all the time instead of drunk because, you got to find a loophole around that one. But yeah, then the other thing would probably be that I think the CPC you had to be a little bit more uniform, I think, in order to fit in socially. With this CRAC, it's like, oh, you could have your kid going to a private Christian school, or you could have your kid going to, being homeschooled or something like that. But in this CPC, at least the ones that I went to, it was very much like, if you do anything other than homeschooling your child and maybe co-op, then like, do you really love your kids? So yeah, but other than that, it really just all kind of felt the same to me. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you've already approached this topic when everything got messed up. So when did you start? When did you start questioning? You've been in church all your life, effectively, and now you're at the CPC and hoping for oversight. Apology later on, but this one on CPC. When did you go from we're just attending here and we're trying to figure things out as a family to things are not going well, and why aren't they doing what they're supposed to be doing, or why are they doing this thing versus this thing, or why are they covering this up, or why aren't they giving this the help, or why are they whatever that may have been. When did you start questioning what was happening at this church?
Well, there's a bit of backstory to that. So we weren't under Marion's leadership at the time when I started realizing things were messed up. Because we were just frequent visitors, so we weren't like technically under his leadership. But so an important thing I think I need to touch on is actually my health issues, because that's kind of the catalyst of where all this went down. So I'd been chronically ill since I was about 13 years old, and it just kind of progressed. By the time I was around 18, I was, I think, having seizures, or maybe I was 19 when I started having the seizures, but I was in a wheelchair, I believe, when I was 18, because I was so fatigued, and my joints were like all like swollen, and I couldn't walk very well. And that's when my parents decided to finally take me to a doctor, because they outright told me that they were not taking me to a real doctor until I turned 18, because they were afraid of child services, that there was abuse and taking me away. So, and I just bought into that, because I was like, well, yeah, of course, mom and dad say that child services would take me away, and, they don't know, that mom and dad love me so much, right? So obviously I'm going to go with that. But yeah, so though an interesting thing is that when I did go to the doctor, because my parents were so divided about their approach to medical stuff, they actually told me that I had 100% like essentially autonomy over my body when it came to medical stuff, because they couldn't agree, so I was the tiebreaker.
Okay.
Which at the time I was like, that's really nice of them. Looking back, I'm like, I was 18. They shouldn't have had to tell me that I had the right to say whether or not I was going to take a certain medication or start a certain protocol for my health. Anyway, so essentially, to kind of sum up what my illness looked like, it was non-epileptic seizures that could last for from a minute to up to, I think the longest one was about 7 hours. And I'm conscious the entire time, because it's not true epilepsy. And I had pretty much every sensory sensitivity you could have. I was in full body pain 24/7. And if I got in too much pain, I would just have a seizure, because my body would just get overloaded. We ended up finding out that I had a sensitivity to a thing called oxalates, and they're essentially it's like a natural chemical found in a plant, or found in plants. I think, if I recall correctly, I think they're kind of supposed to be like a natural pesticide or something. So it essentially, if bugs eat plants with oxalates, the crystals of the oxalates will rip their intestines apart and kill them, I think. And so my body was full of that. And so it was rather painful. So as I got more sick, my mother's drinking just kept getting worse. And, she was essentially a functioning alcoholic. My brother and I would talk about it a lot, and we would go to my dad and be like, hey, can you rein in your wife a little bit? You're supposed to be, the patriarchal head of the household, yet you're letting her drink every night and get at least tipsy enough to the point where she is no longer a pleasant person to be around. Oh gosh. Anyway, so my dad would just kind of make excuses. Every time we would be like, hey, can you talk to her? It was like, oh, well, it's her time of the month that's coming up, or she just had her period, like, oh, she's cranky. I don't want to talk to her now, or she had a bad day. And so he never did anything about it. And that was a lot for our family. And there was just a lot of yelling and cussing and stuff going on in the house. And then my parents were fighting a lot, and they had marriage problems, and then they would drag me into it because I was like, oh, I'll be your therapist and help you. And that was started to get really overwhelming after a while, because it was like every time I heard them argue, I knew I was going to be hearing my name called, being like, hey, come, they would say, come translate for us. Because apparently I knew what the other person was actually talking about, and they couldn't seem to figure it out for themselves. And they had been married for over 20 years, and they're having their daughter figure stuff out instead of going to a pastor or a counselor or a therapist. So that was that was a lot. That was very eye-opening, because I got to see I just got to see a side of them that I think no one else got to see, because I was in their marriage problems, or I was dealing with them. So towards the end, before I left, I would ask my mom to make sensory accommodations for me so I could leave my room, because that was one of the big things. I was essentially trapped in my room, because if I left the room, it was too bright in the house because they had all the windows open or all the lights on, and they were just loud. So the noise sensitivity could send me into a seizure. And then, like, my mom would blast Ben Shapiro on her computer, and it would just go through the entire house. She liked to listen to, I think, Ben Shapiro, Matt Walsh, and Andrew Klavan.
all the Daily Wire people. Yeah.
So, yeah. And so one time I was like, hey, could you maybe, because I always had to wear headphones to block out the noise. So I was like, hey, do you think maybe when you're blasting Ben Shapiro, you could put headphones on instead? So that way I'm not constantly having to wear headphones, because it's a bit much.
Reasonable request. Yeah, reasonable request.
I was told that was not good for my mom's mental health to be wearing headphones all the time, so she shouldn't do it. And she wouldn't do it. Okay. I was like, well, what about me? I'm wearing headphones all the time. And also, like, they never seemed to think that I had any sort of mental problems, like, through all of this. There was no anxiety or depression behind it. It was weird. Anyway, and then another kind of thing that happened right before I left that made me kind of go like, what the fuck? Was I asked my dad if I could get my wheelchair out again, because I had gotten well enough where I didn't need it, and then I kind of had a relapse. And he told me no, I wasn't allowed to use my wheelchair, and he wouldn't get it out of the shed for me because it would make my mother upset to see me in a wheelchair. So despite the fact I needed it medically, my mom's feelings were the trump card in the situation. She would also, if we tried to take the wheelchair out, like to the store or something, she would refuse to take it out of the car. So I'm the one who had to load it in and put it back in, like I had to load it in and out. And Sometimes she would just outright refuse to let me have the wheelchair. So then I got a call from a friend, and one day in 2019, and she started venting to me about some of her problems in her family. And as she was talking, I was like, oh shit, um, all of this is happening to me and more. And I know that she's being abused. Um, so what does that say about me? Um, and so I started connecting the dots. And during that, I was taken to Mayo Clinic for my seizures and was given anti-anxiety medication. And um, they told me to go to therapy because they were like, essentially, this is respectfully all in your head. Like, you're having seizures because you're stressed out. And my parents refused to take me to a therapist, even when I asked to be taken to a therapist. And then I ended up I just stopped the medication because of the stigma, essentially. I made some excuse to get off of them, but I realized the more and more I was on them, the more I needed. And I think that scared me because I think that was telling about my mental health, that I needed a higher dose than we originally thought. So then one day, when my mother and my brother were, I think, out of town, my father confided into me that my mother was emotionally abusive to both of us. He said it outright. I'm pretty sure he even said it without prompting. I don't even know if I brought up the word abuse. And he was like, yeah, no, she's emotionally abusive to both of us. And he was saying that, especially in relation to both of our respective health issues. And so that was huge for me because I was like, oh, damn, if he's saying that she's abusive, there's a good chance that we could actually get help for our family. Like, if he's to the point where he can acknowledge that, maybe he can acknowledge that to an elder. And so that was the time when I actually was trying to get us back into a church, and we ended up in Apologia. And then I had a really bad day one day as far as health, and my father was trying to get us to do a Bible study, like family worship or something, and my mother and my brother, they always had a hard time with it and would always make excuses on why they couldn't do it. And so my father and I decided to confront them that day. And we're like, hey, look, this is the word of God. And, we're supposed to be respectful towards it. And you guys are coming at it with a poor attitude. And they did not like that at all. And so they started, my mother first told me that I had to leave the room because she didn't like being ganged up on. And then my dad told me to stay. So then I was confused because it's like, which parent do I obey? So I stayed, and then they essentially screamed me out of the room, even though they could see I was about to have a seizure. Like, I was visibly shaking, and then they admitted that they did that on purpose. Like, they were purposefully trying to hurt me with the screaming because they knew that it would send me into a seizure. And so I just went up to my dad, and I was like, or I think my dad had come to me at that point because I had gone to another room. And I was like, that is physical abuse. And he's like, yeah, no, that's totally physical abuse. So then I confronted my mother, and she laughed in my face. But she admitted that she did it, but she wouldn't call it abuse. And then she continued to make like side comments about it for the rest of like the month or something. It might have been more than a month. Then in 2020, we had our trip out to Tennessee, my brother and I, and that's when I confided into of the girls from Heritage about what was going on. And one of them was Gabrielle, and then the other one I will keep anonymous. But I told them, and they believed me, but we were so uneducated in all of it that they encouraged me to go back home, and they were like, it's okay, you pray about it, just trust God. I'm sure, I think we even were talking about the fact that we were at Apologia, and it's like, this might actually do something. Um, but the thing is, so right before I left to get on, left my host family's place, my host family was Gabrielle's parents, and they I had known them since I was like 11, and her mom had pulled me into a hug right before I left, and she just whispered in my ear that, like, she was like, I don't know what's going on with you, but I know that something's wrong. And if you ever need a place to stay, you have one in our house. And we have a roof that you can put over your head and a bed for you to sleep in, and you've got 3 square meals. And it was funny because she actually said it was my brother was in the room, but he couldn't hear her because she was like whispering in my ear. And I just pulled away and looked at her, and I almost started crying, but I just walked right out of the house because I didn't know what to do with that information. Like I couldn't just make a snap decision to stay like that. Like that was, but I wanted to so bad, but I felt like I didn't have any free will to do that. It wasn't even like really a thought that I could process. Like there was no, that just wasn't an option for me. So I ended up going back, and we found out, I think, on that trip that that 2 of our friends were getting married, and so I had asked my brother. I was like, "Hey," because he was the one with all the finances. I was not allowed to get a job outside the home, and so he paid for all of our trips and all of our expenses. So I was like, "Hey, could we go back in 2 months to go for the wedding?" And I was so insistent on it, and I normally wasn't that insistent on like asking for financial stuff from either my brother or my parents. But I had this like gut feeling that I just needed to go back for that trip. Like I needed to be in Tennessee for that trip, and for that wedding. And so he agreed, and he bought the tickets, and that was the last time I was home. I did not know I was leaving for good. I would have packed so much better if I knew that. So yeah, so we got to Tennessee, and I'm pretty sure like the second I landed there, pretty much I was back to talking to my friends about the abuse, and because it had just ramped up again. And I remember I think it was the Sunday before I was supposed to leave to go back to Arizona again. I was sitting there and I was taking communion, and I remember just praying to God and being like, I know that if I go back, there's a good chance that I'm going to die. I genuinely did not think that I was going to live. Like, genuinely thought that I would be dead within 5 years because I didn't see how my health could potentially get much worse without it ending in something fatal. But I just remember sitting there and singing and praying to God and being like, I'm going to go back because that's what you want of me, and thy will be done, essentially. That, when I got back from church that day, my brother met me at the host family's place, and he was like, by the way, our flights are canceled because California caught fire, and now the entire Phoenix Valley is covered in smoke. And at that point, during that trip, I had realized that smoke, I think it was during that trip, I had realized that smoke was causing me to have seizures. So my parents were like, obviously you can't fly in. Well, there's smoke everywhere because you will have a seizure the second you land. And that's not fun to have that at the airport because that can take 8 hours for that to go away. Anyway, so the plan was essentially my brother, he ended up going home ahead of me, and I was going to stay for a little bit longer. And one of the guys from Heritage had offered to drive me like halfway, I think, to drop me off so my mom could pick me up once the smoke cleared. So now I am alone for the first time in my entire life. I had never been apart from my family ever in 23 years. And so I was 23 at the time, never been outside of my family. And the amount of stress and just relief and my health started improving almost immediately. Like I just started feeling better. I had energy. My pain was significantly less. And I had chalked it up to the fact that I was like, oh, it's not because I'm being abused, because that's too ridiculous. Even though I knew I was being abused, I still couldn't say the word without having a panic attack. And then I would gaslight myself into thinking it wasn't true. So my parents I told my parents that I thought that maybe, or I had found out that there's a giant cloud of smog that hangs over the Phoenix Valley where I lived. And it turns out there are a lot of oxalates in that cloud. And I was like, oh shit, that is probably why I am not doing very well in Phoenix. So I told my dad that, and then even though he had written, we made jokes about the smog cloud since I was like 8 years old. And he tried to tell me that the pollution and the smog was a liberal agenda because he sent me an article about a liberal person who was reporting on the fact that there was smog over Phoenix and that was bad for the air. So I was like, that doesn't track, because I can see it. Like, I know that's not a liberal agenda. Like, you just look over and there's the smog. So I finally convinced them that it was actually a problem. And they bought these like medical grade air filters for the house. And then they bought me a mask and then like a filter for the car. So, essentially the idea is I was going to go back to Phoenix and I was going to have to wear a mask the whole time, which was really, really funny because my dad was so anti-mask because of the whole COVID thing was going on. And he was like, my rights, the government's squashing my rights. But when my dad tells me to wear a mask, I have to wear a mask because I don't have rights apparently. So the idea was I was going to go back. I would not be able to leave the house because if I left the house, I would be exposed to the smoke or the smog. And my parents had planned on moving us back to Tennessee. Like my dad was putting out job applications. He actually applied for the place that my husband works at now. And so we didn't know how long it would take for him to find a job. So he was like, you could essentially be stuck in the house for up to a year. Because he didn't really have any concrete plans. And I was like, I'm not really comfortable with that because I had already been stuck in the house for years because of how sick I was. And now I'm in Tennessee and I'm healthy for the first time. I was still having seizures, but like I could function. I could actually go out and hang out with people. I'm pretty sure I went over and I was like helping a family like clean their house at one point, which was something I just couldn't do before. So I told my dad, I told him I was not spiritually or emotionally strong enough to go back. And I was like, I can't just live in confinement any longer. Like, and so I pretty much was like, can I just stay in Tennessee with the host family? They already offered to let me stay. And I'll just stay here until you guys move. And he completely dismissed all of that. And it was interesting because so Gabrielle and the other woman who I had confided in, they were actually listening to the phone call with my dad about that. And he didn't know that they were listening, I don't think. And I remember ending the call and I went to the living room and Gabrielle was just crying. And she was like, when are you just going to say no? Like, when are you going to say no to all of this? Because she could see how just distraught I was about the fact that I would have to go back and just be stuck in my room again for a year. So that's when I asked her, I said, hey, can you text your parents and tell them I need to talk with them? So we went back to her house and we had a conversation, and it was one of the most impactful conversations I had had, because the host mother was like, I told them everything that was going on. They believed me. They knew my family, and they had seen how weird they were, but they weren't like, oh, you need to do XYZ, you need to go to the elders, you need to run away. They didn't say, they did not really give any input. All she said was, she was like, what do you want to do? And like, that was the first time anyone had ever asked me with sincerity, what do you want to do with your life? Like, because my life was already planned out, right? It's like, I was going to get married, and I was going to have kids, and I was going to be a stay-at-home wife, and, I was going to be a church member, and I was just going to raise babies and then die. That was it. And it all had to be under the specific structure of being passed from my father to my husband, and with no breaks in between. And so I decided to stay, and I told them that, and they were like, okay, we're not going to tell you what to do. We're just here to help. So the host father, he essentially offered to be my like bodyguard / assistant, which was so sweet of him. I love him to death. He's amazing. I could not have done any of this without him, truly, like, or the host mother. But he was such an emotional rock for me, just being there. Like, he and I talked a bit, but it wasn't like I was having like big heart to hearts with him or anything like that. It was just, he was just there for me. And I knew that if I said, hey, sir, I would like to do XYZ, he'd be like, all right, she said she wants to do XYZ, let's get this done. And so I essentially was like, I don't really, I said I wanted to go to the elders. So I think he set up a meeting with them. I can't remember how exactly. Some of this is a little out of order because it's been like almost 5 years. But right after I had that meeting with my host family, my father called the host father, and the guy was like, hey, your dad's calling or wants to call me. He's like, do you want to listen in? And I was like, yeah, because they used to be friends, but then like weird church drama went down, so they stopped talking. So it was really weird that my dad wanted to talk with him. And he calls him up, and he's like, I'm just checking to see how my daughter's doing. Is she like being rebellious or anything? Because she's acting really weird with us. And we're just making sure that she's not, he was essentially being like, she's not being like disobedient to you guys or something. He phrased it very weirdly. And also I don't know if he ever said my name the entire time. It was always my daughter. And so the host father, he was like, no, she's been like the model guest. And he's like, all I know is that she's a little upset about having to go back to Phoenix because, of her health issues. And then he very politely was like, hey, we're willing to have her stay with us until you guys move, like, or however long she needs to stay. Like, we've got an extra bed. And my dad was like, he's like, my blood ran cold when I heard him talk, like, answer. He like snapped at the guy, and he was like, this is my daughter, stay out of it. And then the guy was like, okay, I'm staying up. He like, sure, I'll stay out of it. And he hung up. And so after that, I had tried to talk to my dad one more time, and I called him, and the host father and Gabrielle were in the room, and they heard him admit to the fact that he had previously said that my mother was abusive. He then tried to take it back and said that he didn't mean that, and he didn't mean that she was abusive, even though he said it twice. So I still don't, he never clarified what he meant by it, so I still don't know what he meant the first time, except for the words that came out of his mouth, which was the fact that he said his wife was abusive. Then there was a series of text exchanges where I was told that I didn't have a choice and that they were bringing me home. I told them how scared I was to come back and how I was afraid of having seizures and being in pain. And they told me that all that mattered was that I was in physical proximity to them because they were scared of COVID restrictions shutting down the border and them not having access to me. I had recently gone through those messages. I had taken some screenshots of them and I recently reviewed them, and it was terrifying seeing how my parents gave no thought to my safety. Like, no thought to my emotions. They did not care how I felt. They kept telling me I was in sin because I was anxious of being in pain. They told me that I needed to check my attitude, and and they said there was no negotiating. I was coming home. And so then I went to the CPC elders, and that was when I officially left. That was August 12th, 2020. And I tried to seek help with the church. So that was long-winded.
No, that's good. Yeah. I mean, not good as in this is good stuff, but
Yeah, no,
that's very thorough. So, next logical question:
mm-hmm.
What happened when you approached the elders?
Yeah. Well, when we got to the first meeting with the elders, they said that my dad had actually called them, and was trying to ask about me, but they had missed his call, so it had gone to voicemail. And so they were planning on calling him back after my meeting with them. I ended up having, I think, roughly around 4-ish meetings with the session altogether. I went first. I just told them my story. I was still kind of fumbling with my words as far as how to describe the abuse, because I was just very new to that kind of language, and also trying to just figure out how to say it in sort of the culture of the church was a bit difficult too sometimes, like phrasing it so that way. I don't know. It was a weird way to talk. Anyway, so
Christianese and therapy speak don't always work well together.
Yeah. So I ended up asking for membership, and it was just essentially like, I'm seeking help. I just want help. I would love to reconcile with my family. I want all of us to get help collectively. I said I wanted to go to counseling or therapy, and I said that I wouldn't move back with my parents unless they also went to counseling and therapy, and then my mother's drinking stopped. Those were, I think, essentially my only 2 conditions on going back, was just therapy and stopping with the alcohol. Because I figured that once she stopped with the alcohol, she'd just become a nicer person. And I had every intention on moving back with them when I went to the elders. I don't think I even thought about not moving back. It just didn't seem like, it was like, that just seems stupid. Like, of course I'd move back if they repent and we get good with God and everything. So then that's when things started kind of going downhill, the conversations with the elders. I can't remember if I told them right away that I had witnesses to my father talking about the abuse, because it wasn't like it wasn't like I had set up the phone call to be like, oh, I'm going to catch him say I'm abusive and then take it to the elders. I think it was just he had said it and we kind of forgot about it. But eventually I had gone back and told them, I was like, hey, by the way, I have 2 witnesses who can testify to the fact that my father admitted that there was abuse in the household. And also I had another, Gabrielle had witnessed my mother cussing me out on the phone when she thought that I was trying to stay. I hadn't told her I was staying, but I was kind of like hinting around to the fact that I didn't want to come back, like strongly hinting around the fact that I didn't want to come back. and she flipped out on me, and I was in the room with Gabrielle, and the phone was not on speaker, but like I had to pull the phone away from me, and we could hear my mother screaming at me as if she was on speakerphone. And so I told Marion that I had at least two people, and if he had bothered to continue to look into the case, he could have easily found many people who would have testified that my mother was an alcoholic. But it took a very simple just search into her life to find people who had experienced her being an alcoholic. Anyway, Marion told me that my witnesses were not valid because I did not obtain them in the way that he interpreted Matthew 18. He said that the accused needed to know that they were being witnessed in order for that to be a valid witness. And I was like, well, the problem is that my father is never going to actually admit to anyone that.
Yeah, especially if they know that that's why the person's there to listen to them.
Yeah. So I was like,
what abuser is like, yes, okay, so I know you're here for me to witness to my language about my abusive behavior, so yes, I'm abusive.
Exactly. So I was really confused because I was like, I understand that I didn't like do the steps like to a T properly, but like I got enough evidence for them.
You have witnesses and evidence. It's what you need.
And so so that was a pattern with Marion. He very much hyper focused on the reaction of the victim and then also on the order of the witnesses. And for him, witness was simply you go to someone and be like, hey, I think this was his interpretation was like you have to bring people to talk while you're talking to the person who was sitting against you, and they have to just witness the conversation, not necessarily the fact that they did it, but also, I don't know. None of it made any sense to me.
No, it's not gonna make any sense to anybody who's listening either.
Yeah. So so that was like my big red flag. That I was like, that's really weird that he can't take a simple witness. Like this seems like a very clear cut case. And then the host father he came to me with meetings, and then he would just take notes, and he was pretty much silent the entire time, which was really great. And I actually, a lot of my notes that I got were from all of his like transcripts and stuff from these meetings. But he was accused of sinning by the other member of the session, Keith Bradshaw. Because apparently he also was supposed to have followed Matthew 18 in helping.
For what?
I don't know. Could not tell you.
Okay.
Also accused of blocking me from talking with my family, which wasn't true. I had simply said, hey, to my family, I was essentially like, hey, I don't want to direct communication with you. If you want to talk to me, you can send me a letter at the address I'm at, or you can send a letter through the host guy, and then when I'm feeling emotionally ready, I will read your letter. But I do not want my inboxes, and I don't want my text messages. I don't want everything flooded with you guys texting me and messages from you, because I want to be able to go on my phone and not have a panic attack. And so the guy was actually facilitating a way for me to communicate, but he was told that he was in sin because he was stopping communication, even though he never once told me I wasn't allowed to read an email or a message from any of my family. Every time I got one, he would be like, and I actually, you know what, I'm not going to say that because I don't even know if they ever went through him to talk to me. They violated my boundaries so many times during all of this. Anyway, they also seem to think that like the host father was like pushing me to do this. I don't think they could wrap their heads around the fact that there was a man in my life that wasn't trying to control me. I genuinely think that was a novel concept to them.
Yeah, or agreed with your decision. It's like, oh,
Yes,
he's
yes,
agreeing with a woman's
yeah,
decision to do what she wants.
yeah. Also, before I'd even gone to the elders, I had actually contacted another elder from the CPC who was a friend of my host family. I think it was Bill Hine. I don't think he's a member or he's an elder of the CPC anymore. But I had a phone conversation with him, and I was essentially like, "Hey, yo, here's my situation. Is it biblically right for me to leave?" And I will never forget this phone call because it was so short. Because he essentially asked me one question. He was like, "How old are you?" And I was like, "I'm 23." And he's like, "Yes, you can leave." Like, it
Yeah,
was like for him, he was like, what the heck? Like, why is this 23-year-old woman asking me whether or not she can move out of her father's house?
yeah.
He was one of the more, his family was one of the more chill CPC families that I had
Hmm.
encountered. So, uh, let's see, after that, oh yeah, also the host family was told by the session that they were not allowed to talk to me about the abuse anymore. Um, that we were just not supposed to have conversations about it.
Yeah.
Even
So let me get this straight. It's they told you what counts as witnesses as long as a witness tells the perpetrator that they're witnessing, and the perpetrator should tell them what they're witnessing, and you are supposed to always be hearing from the perpetrator no matter how many boundaries that you want to set up. And then this.
yeah,
So it's it's ridiculous.
yes, and it was so frustrating too because I was raised to believe that the elders were there for protection. Like
Yeah, exactly.
they
Yep.
were there to hold people accountable, and they were there
Yep.
so if something happens and you know like home life gets fucked up, you can go and be like, "Hey, help me." So
Yeah.
me going to the elders and them just immediate suspicion. There was no there was just immediate suspicion on me. I
Yep.
had
That is the like the biblical qualification for an elder
yeah,
is for them to be there to protect those people who are in the church,
yes. Yeah.
not
It
protect other people to hurt the church, but to protect those in the church.
it seems to me that the people from these denominations and these circles value the appearance of the church over the actual church itself. Um
Exactly. Yep. 100%.
yeah, the and I find that insulting actually to Jesus because it's
Yep.
like you're telling me that the like omnipresent, omnipotent, all of those fancy words to say that he's the most
He's going to be
powerful
fooled by your service level, whatever it is.
that or just like that he needs your defense, like that he needs
Yeah.
you to make him look good.
Yeah, exactly.
The audacity and the just lack of humility and that is baffling.
True. True. Very
Um,
true.
yeah, I had told the elders I was like, um, they were I could tell they were just really suspicious and they kept like just asking me a bunch of like questions over and over again. And then I was telling them about how my family was really manipulative because I just were. And he then accused me of being manipulative and then told so then he was kind of like implying that I was manipulating him into telling him that my family was manipulative, but if my family's manipulative, then I'm manipulative. But if they're not manipulative, then I'm not manipulative, but I am. It was very confusing. It was just a weird circle of just them gaslighting me and dismissing anything I had to say.
Yep. Yeah. But you're disrupting, like you said, you're disrupting the peace. You're telling by you coming and talking about abuse, you're like, what if that gets out to the congregation? What if other people figure out that there's a family that's not doing well?
Yeah.
But then, like you said, that's the very point of a church and the elders to help those
Yes.
who are there, not to act like it doesn't exist and move on with their lives.
This is jumping ahead a bit, but like now that I'm out of all of that, I can tell you I have received more Christ like compassion and help from
Yep.
people who don't even claim the name of Christ.
Yep.
than those fucking hypocrites at the pulpit.
Yep.
And I'm the bad guy.
Yep.
In all of it. It's something.
As long as you claim the name of Christ, you could be a D-bag and
Yep. Yes.
you're still good.
Well, and I was raised with, and I don't know if this is prevalent in like the denominations and circles I ran in, but like my family was like, if someone was a Christian and they said, "Will you please forgive me?" You didn't have a choice whether or not to forgive them. But then once you said, "Yes, I do forgive you," then you're not allowed to bring it up ever again. And you're not allowed to talk about it. You're not allowed to point out a pattern. Anytime I would try to do that with my family and be like, "Hey, you drank too much," my mom would be like, "But I apologized for that. Don't talk about that." It's like, but you did it again.
You still drank too much.
Yeah, and it's like, I understand the whole you're supposed to keep forgiving, but you can't keep forgetting when it's every day.
Yeah.
That creates disorders. So anyway, the elders also told me that my case was not in the elders' jurisdiction because it was familial and not ecclesiastical, whatever the fuck that means. I don't understand how it wasn't an elder issue, considering I thought that family issues like that were something that the elders were supposed to be involved in. Like any sin issue actually was something the elders were supposed to be involved in.
Yeah.
So
they just tried finding any way not to get involved.
Yes. No, they really did. It was really disheartening. Like I knew that I wasn't technically a member of their church, but I had been previously a member of their church, and like I had been going and I was in contact with a bunch of the people there. So it was like I was in this community, whether or not I was like on paper a member, I was still involved. And so the session essentially was like insinuating that I was exaggerating the abuse. I think they might have just outright said it at one point. My friends were accused of talking me into it, and like that they were the ones who brought up that I was abused because they wanted me to live there or something. I don't know. They also kept being like, "Oh, you're just saying that because you want to live in Tennessee." And it's like, yes, I want to live in Tennessee because this is where my friends are, but also I would really like to get out of the abusive situation. And so what am I going to do? Just go to like, I don't know, fucking Oregon or something and like go to some random family and be like, "Hey, can you take me in? Cause like I can't go to Tennessee because apparently I like it too much." And that's a red flag. So they also really honed in on how much independence I had now that I was in Tennessee and my family wasn't with me. And like they just really were trying to push the narrative that this was a issue of me just being rebellious and not wanting maleness over me. It's just a really weird thing to say because they do say that. It's just I don't like that term. It feels weird. Anyway, I had asked the session like, "Hey, I want like weeks to maybe a month to just kind of have time away from my family without contact with them so I can heal, essentially." And Keith, the other elder, said no. He said I wasn't supposed to do that. They also disapproved of my limited contact with my family, obviously. And they just kept misrepresenting the fact and being like, "Oh, you're cutting off contact." It's like, no, I'm limiting contact. There's a difference. They can still contact me. They just have to be respectful about it. And then my parents were saying that like they were saying that essentially they thought that people were writing things to them like from my account or something, and that all the stuff that I sent them being like, "I don't want to live with you guys," was from other people. So essentially the meetings with the elders kind of devolved into them digging for a sin issue with me. So like they just thought that there was something I did wrong. They wanted me to go to a counselor and then give them access to my sessions, like my session notes and my counselor, so that way they can know if I was telling the truth or not. Because I thought that a counselor could determine whether or not I was being truthful. I told them that made me feel really uncomfortable because that was like a severe breach of my privacy. There was like some weird sexual things that were going on too that like I did not want to talk to the elders about because that was just really private, and like talking about that to, these men who were like in their 50s and I was like 23 at the time, that just felt really awkward. And I still hadn't wrapped my head around everything that had actually happened. So, but they were really insistent about the fact that they needed to be able to see my session notes. I'd even had, I believe, a video call with Todd Adams. I don't know if you're familiar with him. I think he does like biblical counseling and stuff. I think he might have written a book or two. And he was someone that the session seemed to have admire and hold in high regard. And he even told me, he was like, "Yeah, no, it's a good thing that you left." But that was not enough for the elders. Personally, this is just speculation, but I think that they were just trying to put so many hoops in front of me to jump through that they were hoping I would give up. I genuinely believe that they did not actually try at all. I think they stopped trying after the first meeting. I think their thing was essentially, these aren't technically our congregants and we don't want to get involved. Which I feel like the way they talked about me obtaining membership kind of proves my point. Very early on, I think it was within the first or second meeting with them, they outright barred me from the table. And their thing was because I was not a member of a church. I had no church membership anywhere, so I wasn't allowed to take communion. And even though that was not my choice, like I had wanted to become a member of a church for a long time, and my family was standing in the way of that. They refused to actually tie us to a church. Anyway, so they cut me off from the table. I actually had my first plan of committing suicide after that. The idea of cutting me off from the table after like losing my family and feeling like I had not been in communion with or in community with people for so long, the loneliness was just kind of overwhelming. And at that point I was just like, I don't know what the point is anymore of living. And it hurt too much. And I know it's kind of a small thing because
No, it's not.
It felt like it was, but thankfully there was someone that I had met, and I had called that person and was essentially like, "Hey, I really want to kill myself," and that person was like, "Hey, how about you not do that? Like there's more to life than just taking communion." Not that they were trying to dismiss the importance of it, but they were just like, "You have stuff to live for, and you can get through this." And really glad I didn't kill myself that day. But then I found out, I have to admit, I do not remember exactly how I came by this information. I believe it was through the guy that my host family's father, he had a meeting one-on-one with, I think it was Keith. It might have been Marion too, but I feel like it was maybe just him and Keith. And actually, oh, that is jumping ahead a little bit. It was me, it was, I think, my parents, because my parents came into town. I'll get to that in a minute. And my host family's father all had a meeting. And I found out that if I were to get membership at their church, if I could not provide within 6 months proof of the abuse, that I was going to be excommunicated. And that was like, I think that was the final straw for me, honestly, because I was like, what more proof do you need? I have two people who can tell you that this happened. Like, and they were not giving me clear answers on what they actually wanted as far as proof, or what they wanted me to do to become a member. It was all very vague. And it was interesting. After I had eventually left Heritage, I went to George Grant's church, and I had a meeting with him and told him everything that happened. And he, it was interesting because I was like kind of just going through my story, and I was numb to it at that point. And he stopped me in the middle of that part where I talked about the excommunication and just like how they handled the abuse. And he was like, I just need to tell you that that is wrong. He's like, that is actually wrong. What they did to you is not right. And that was like, oh, that was so comforting to hear an elder actually say that that was not handled correctly. And also an elder that like, it wasn't just some random guy. It was like, it was someone who I people in our circles respected and looked up to. And I think some of the people at the church actually were going to his school or something at that point. Anyway, so one of the last, I think it was the last meeting I had with the session, they kept pounding about the abuse and how it all went down and stuff. And then I kept saying I came to realize I was abused. That was the verbiage I was using, because it was true. I didn't realize at the time I was being abused. It took me a while to get to the point where I understood what abuse was. And Marian looked me in the eye and said that victims of abuse always know in the moment when they are being abused. You can't come to know that they're being abused. And at that point, I was over his bullshit. And I just like looked at him with just like, it was like incredulous. I was like, I'm like, I think a lot of abused people would disagree with you on that. Mm-hmm. He didn't reply to it, but I swear if that man didn't have any witnesses, he would have lunged across the table and killed me. He looked so pissed. I might be exaggerating about the killing me part, but he looked like he wanted to hurt me. And I was just like, damn, you can't accept any criticism. Like, you cannot accept a smidgen of criticism in this area. And I can say now that that was about 4 or 5 years ago. You can come to know that there's abuse, and like come to know that things that happened to you were abusive. I came to figure out some other stuff, like the fact that spanking me naked as a child was in fact a form of sexual abuse. I found out later that apparently when you spank a child, it sends blood to their genitals and it arouses them. And it stimulates a form of sexual arousal in your children. And that's why it's a kink, too. Like the spankings, sorry. Not the children. Oh god, I shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry, you can get that out. Anyway, that was something where I had the spankings as a child was something that I had struggled with my entire life, but I didn't know that I could struggle with it. And so I never said anything to anyone about it. Even my parents. My parents would actually make jokes about it all the time when I was older. And I remember feeling so uncomfortable because I just remembered being like just a little kid and being scared in the middle of the night and not knowing how to tell my parents I was scared of the dark and being scared of being alone. And I would get out of bed after they tucked me in, and that was a form of disobedience, and you have to spank every form of disobedience because that's what they believed. And I would be stripped down and I would be held down and beat with I want to say it was like a 1x1 or a 2x2 or something like that, like inches. It was like a little, had hard edges. It wasn't even like rounded out or anything. And we had lived with my grandma at the time, who I don't believe approved of spankings. So I have this very distinct memory of me coming out one night and getting out of bed and being scared and going down to my parents in the basement. And I remember I had been squirming so much because they were beating me. And my mom was pinning me down, like she was practically laying on top of me, beating me and hissing in my ear, "Don't you dare scream or say a word, or else your grandmother will call CPS and you will be taken away from us forever." And that was a message I got from 4 years old. And I have a son now, and I can't imagine ever doing that to him. I don't care what he does. I can't imagine beating him for getting out of bed. I just don't get it. Anyway, so yeah, you can come to realize you're abused, and even if that's almost 20 years later. Other things that I realized was just the demonization of other denominations. My dad would just shit talk them all the time, and it's like they just had feelings, and you didn't like the fact that they had feelings. Honestly, that was a lot of it. My dad would just make fun of other denominations for being kind. Obviously he didn't realize, I don't think he realized that was the common denominator of his gripes with them. Anyway, there were eating disorders in my family that I came to realize. My dad would sexualize me in weird ways. He used to compare me to his ex-lovers, and as a way of encouraging me that I would one day find a husband. And on the same note, he would also tell me how he was not, how my mom was not his preferred type. So that was a little unsettling. And also coming to realize what a piss poor education I had has been infuriating. Both me and my brother had really poor education because we were homeschooled, and my parents didn't know the first thing about teaching children. But I had an even worse education because I was a woman. So a lot of the things where I'd be like, "Hey, can you teach me XYZ?" They'd be like, "Oh, don't worry, you'll figure it out when you need to." And it's like, yeah, well, I needed to 5 years ago, and I'm still trying to figure it out. And it's kind of hard. So I also had health issues, which did hinder my education, but there were ways they could have worked around that if they had actually put in the time and effort. So the man who, my host family's father, he, I think I had mentioned this at some point earlier, he had met with my parents, and I believe it was Keith. I can't find my notes. And so, mind you, this is, I guess, secondhand stuff that I know. But he had made pretty extensive notes. Going off of those notes, apparently my family told him that they were staying for the long haul, in Tennessee, and because they had driven all the way from Phoenix, to come get me. Which, mind you, in the state that I was in, felt extremely threatening, because it was like, you don't have a choice with this. And I'm looking at it being like, I am a legal adult. I've been a legal adult for a while now. And they're telling me that I have to come home with them no matter what. And it kind of felt like they were talking about kidnapping me. And maybe that's me being a little, over dramatic about it. But honestly, that's how I felt. I felt like someone was out there trying to kidnap me and get me back, because I didn't know what life would look like once I got back home. I had disrupted the family secrets, and so I was scared that if I had gone back, that without anything being resolved, that I essentially would just be stuck in my room for the rest of my life. or until my father married me off to someone. But I assumed that my access to internet would be either taken away or restricted. I assumed I probably wouldn't be able to leave the house even if I, medically could. It felt very scary to hear that they were going to stick around and wait for me to come back like that without wanting to address the sin issues. They tried to say that they wanted, from what I understand with this meeting is they thought that they were, I think they were trying to present themselves as being, oh, hold on one second. Can you hear my baby crying?
I can, but it's not very loud.
Okay. All right. I can ask him to move the.
Don't worry about it. It's totally fine.
Okay. Anyway, so they said that they were there and they wanted to do whatever I wanted to do. And then when the guy clarified, apparently only if that was biblical as far as wanting to meet up with them, and they thought that I needed to meet face to face. So they didn't actually want to do what I wanted to do. They just said they'll do the biblical thing, which is meeting face to face, which I don't see that in the Bible anywhere where I have to be face to face with the person who hurt me. It didn't seem like a biblical thing. It just kind of seemed like something they were pulling out of their ass. Then this was the part that definitely was a lot more scary. They told the guy that there would be lasting implications if it took me too long to reconcile with them. Didn't clarify what lasting implications was. But that was not, that was horrifying to hear. I think that's when I realized that genuinely realized that my parents were not safe people. Then apparently my father admitted that there were elements of truth of what I was saying, but that there was missing context. I'm not sure what context could justify my mother's alcoholism. I understand why she's an alcoholic. I genuinely do. She has had a hard life, but that's not justification. And especially with their theological views, that is definitely not a justification. And then they said, and then they kept talking about how it was there's just miscommunications going on, which I felt like I was being very clear, which was, I feel like I'm being abused in this situation and I want help. And it was very frustrating to feel like I was just constantly being gaslit. And them just trying to make it seem like it was not as big of a deal as it was. They said they wanted me to be safe and happy, but when I asked for things that would make me feel safe and happy, they told me that I was in sin. So I don't understand how they can reconcile the things that they said to their actions. So that was, I think, one of the last meetings that had happened. I think I had a meeting with Marion and Keith after that, but I think I already went over that one. So then outside of the meetings, how things were handled at the church. Now, mind you, I was not invited to this meeting, but Marion got up and he mischaracterized my situation to the entire congregation and discouraged people from taking sides, and then claimed that he knew more about the case than anyone else did, which was just factually wrong. When I told him to talk to certain people who knew about the case more than he didn't do anything about it. He hardly even acknowledged the fact that there were other people who could possibly know what was going on. He also, this one was a fun one. I was at a wedding for someone at the church. It was another wedding. And there was a visitor, and I had met her previously. And I think they were, at the wedding, they were doing the father-daughter dance. And I was just kind of standing back, and I was crying because I realized that there was a good chance that I would never get that father-daughter dance at my own wedding. And this woman came up to me, and she gave me a really long hug, and she prayed in my ear. She didn't really know all the stuff that was going on, but she was praying that for comfort and peace and all of that. And then that woman got rebuked by, I think it was Keith, for giving me a prolonged embrace. And I think there was something said along the lines of me being a bad influence or something. Or implied that I was being a bad influence. And so, like, I could receive no public display of compassion or support from anyone in the church, even members of the church who were just visiting. Then my parents had showed up right around that time, and so my host family actually got a safe house ready for me just in case my parents came onto the property and tried to take me. So thankfully I didn't have to use the safe house because my parents left very quickly. Their definition of staying for the long haul was very interesting. I think it lasted 2 weeks. They went home. So, because I've refused to meet up with them because I had put a boundary in place that I did not want to meet with them, and they wouldn't respect that. And the more that they pushed for that, the more I was like, this is definitely not going to happen because you can't even respect a basic request. Like, I'm not your 15-year-old daughter who ran away. I'm 23 years old, and I left on my own accord. And if you can't respect my position as an adult to say, I don't want to be part of that anymore, then I'm not going to bother sitting down having a meeting with you because I know that all they're going to do is they're just going to bully me into trying to repent. So there were some letters that were exchanged with my parents. My mother did send an apology, but it was the vaguest apology I have ever seen. And I'm pretty sure she even said, if I did anything to hurt you. It wasn't, I did something that hurt you, will you please forgive me? It was like, if I hurt you, I'm sorry. Which, how I was raised and how they raised me was, that's not an apology. You name your sin explicitly, and then you ask for forgiveness. And they never once named an explicit sin. So I ended up exchanging some rather long letters with my father. And the first letter that he sent me, he refused to even talk about the issue. He just kept saying how I was doing something wrong by not being with them and how I was rebelling, and they didn't understand why I was leaving. That was a big one. They would be like, I don't understand what you're like, why you're not coming back home. Like, I understand what's going on. It's like, if you listened to the words coming out of my mouth, you would understand why I left. And they kept talking about how people were talking me into this, which I can say no one talked me into it. I was supported, but I was not. No one was like, hey, don't go back to your parents. The closest thing I got to that was Gabrielle saying, when are you going to say no? But I had already been on that sort of train of thought of I needed to say no at some point. Then he sent me another letter, which there was a specific long paragraph that he put in there that really, I think, showed his lack of empathy in the situation. He had said, let's see. He said, you are in an active state of rebellion, first and foremost against God. This is clear by your outright refusal to do as he commanded and be reconciled with us. Which I don't understand how I was supposed to be reconciled with them when they refused to actually take accountability or even acknowledge the sin that was going on. They kept turning the tables on me and being like, well, you did the wrong thing by saying that there was something wrong going on. Then he said, you continue to hide behind your host family, the postal system, and your ambiguous SJW, neo-pagan, pseudo-psychological mumbo-jumbo talk of needing time to heal.
Okay.
And I just want to point out that needing to take time away is not an unbiblical principle. If I recall correctly, I'm pretty sure Jesus went away a couple times and he would go and be alone in like the desert, and he
And right before he was betrayed by Judas, he was at the Garden of Gethsemane praying and crying out to the Lord for what was about to happen to him. And that was for hours where he was just on his own
yes,
and pouring out his heart to the Lord.
exactly.
Um, it's and you see that all throughout Scripture with the prophets, with Abraham, with everybody else, with David. I mean, what else are the Psalms other than extended meditations and time away with yourself? It's neo-pagan mumbo jumbo,
Yeah.
SJW social justice warrior. Like, where does this stuff come from?
He really liked his buzzwords. My father really liked to just slap labels on things in order to.
Gotcha.
So,
It's
a
probably also
label,
Marxist too in some way.
yes, a label that he would, if he sees this, a label he'll probably slap on me is the fact that I'm a blue-haired feminist because I dyed my hair a little bit blue. And that, honestly, he would use that as a way to discredit me just by saying, oh, she's got a septum piercing, or she's got tattoos now, or she cut her hair short. It's like, those are not things that are going, that's not, that
And
doesn't,
even if they were, who the heck cares?
exactly. And so further into his letter, he talks about how I'm neck deep in sin and how I never brought my grievances to my mother, which was just categorically false. And he says that I know these last few years have been the most challenging season we have ever faced as a family, and we have not always met them perfectly, sinlessly. Still, I'm not sure how you conclude that either your mother or brother could have ever abused you in any sense of the word. He then goes on to quote a couple of passages from the Bible, which again make me wonder, honestly, was he genuinely trying to get me back? Because if he was, this was not the way to do it, because I took this as an actual threat. He quoted, in this paragraph, he had quoted the part where in Romans where it says that people who are disobedient to their parents deserve death. He then quoted Matthew that said, for God commands, honor your father and mother. Whoever reviles father or mother must surely die. And then he...
a use and abuse of the fifth commandment.
Sorry?
That's a use and abuse of the fifth commandment.
Yes. And then he said that, you do not have our blessing or permission to live in Kobol at this time, especially in the overt state of sin you're living in.
Yeah.
Then he quoted Deuteronomy 21:18-21, which is the verse about how if you have a stubborn and rebellious son, you take him to the elders and the elders kill him. He tried to say that he loved me, and I'm sorry, but I don't say that to people that I love, that I think that they should die for things like saying something mean against me.
And not to say that this would be better if you were 18 or under, but you were, as you said, 23 when these things were being told of you. Outright citizen, not obeying your parents when you are an adult and making your own decisions. But then again, as you had said before, in an intensely patriarchal society and church, the woman doesn't have authority no matter how old or young she is.
Yes. And I grew up, one of the first Bible stories that I remember hearing was of Abraham and Isaac. And the fact that God asked Abraham to kill his son. And I think I was like 4 or 5 years old when I heard that story. And that stuck with me as a kid because my family was they're fundamentalists. So they were like, yeah, no, like everything in the Bible is applicable to today. So it was like, well, if mommy and daddy think that Abraham was right for trying to kill his son because God told him to, what is stopping them from doing something like that to me or my brother when, if they think that God said that? So that was kind of a scary thing to kind of have in the back of your head growing up as a kid. And then to have him say that as an adult and be like, oh, okay, so that train of thought was maybe, I don't know if my dad necessarily would have killed me, but that train of thought wasn't far off, that he thought that I deserved to die for doing something that he thought was wrong.
Yeah.
Also, another thing is that they kept saying, like, I don't understand why you're doing this, and like, this isn't how we raised you. But I was also raised with the fact that they said, train up a child in the way he shall go, and when he's old, he shall not depart from it. My father told me that was a promise. That wasn't just that might happen, that was a promise. I remember going to a homeschool convention, and there was a woman there speaking, and her son had left the faith. And I remember my dad telling me that it was her fault that her son left the faith because she was obviously not a good enough parent. So even if they weren't abusive, let's just say for shits and giggles, they weren't abusive. They didn't really do anything that bad like that. They had to have done something catastrophically wrong for me to be in the position I am in now today. Because they trained me. And also I was extremely isolated as a child and as an adult. So it wasn't like I had a lot of outside influence. So that is so on them that I am in this position and that I left.
That's a good point. That's a great point. Yeah, if they are blaming other parents for the waywardness of their children, why aren't they placing that same onus of responsibility on themselves for your waywardness or your accusatoriness of their abuse? It's if they blame somebody else, you gotta point the finger at yourself.
Yeah. That was always really confusing.
Not saying, like you said, not saying that verse is to be taken literally as a promise, but according to their own interpretation, if they're going to be consistent with that interpretation, you got to apply it to yourself.
Yeah. Well, it's a little ironic. I had mentioned this before, but like when they left Illinois when I was 8 years old and they moved us across the country, they did it because they wanted to get away from my father's mother and also my mother's parents and her extended family. And so I find it really interesting that they demonstrated to me as a child that it is okay to leave your family if they're doing something that's harmful to you. And my mother would also, she would cut contact with her mom all the time, because her mom and her, they would fight all the time and they'd have arguments. And I remember my mom talking all the time about the fact that she didn't know how to honor her mother, while also talking to her at the same time because she couldn't, because they were always fighting. And so at some point she just stopped talking to her altogether. So these things that I've done were things that they demonstrated to me as a child. And if they think that it was so wrong that I did it, then they should at least have the guts to own the fact that they did something wrong when they left my grandmother's and my grandfather. So anyway, the final straw with my parents, and as far as my relationship with them, was because I had left and I didn't know that I was moving. I asked them if they could set some of my stuff aside for someone in Phoenix to come pick up and send it to me. I didn't ask them to send any of the stuff, didn't ask them to put a dime into the shipping or anything like that. I already had a person who was willing to come grab the stuff from their house. I think I even told them that they didn't even have to pack the stuff. They could literally just throw it out into the yard and the person will come and pack it up. And I did that. And I also contacted their elders and said, hey, I'm about to ask for my stuff back, but things have been contentious with my family. Can you please, can you just mediate so that way they're not taking from me, they're not stealing, and also I'm getting my stuff back, but we're all being civil. And the response I got back seemed like they were like, oh yeah, no, that sounds cool. But when my father replied back and essentially said, no, we're not going to do that. You have to come to Phoenix alone or with one of our elders, and you have to come into the house and get the stuff yourself. And I tried to explain to them, like, medically, I cannot do that. Like, I can't even get to the airport, to the Nashville airport, in order to get my stuff. So this isn't me trying to be like, oh, I don't want to see you. This is I physically cannot go down and get that stuff. And then they still refused after I explained that to them. So I was like, hey, elders, this is kind of the reason why I wanted you on board. And they told me, the elders said that I was in a state of sin and that if I did not repent, they would not talk to me. And mind you, these are elders who never heard my side of the story. They heard my parents' side of the story, but they never heard my side of the story. And I was like, I think I ended my conversation with that particular session by saying that they're the reason why people leave the faith. Responses like that are the reason why people leave the faith. And I don't think I ever got a response back to that. But after jumping way ahead, I ended up getting some of my stuff back. Actually, a couple of years ago, my husband and some of my roommates actually went down to where they had moved to Florida. So we went down to Florida and we got my stuff back. Some of it, I should say, because one, they refused to give me my gun back, which I actually paid for with money that I earned from a customer service job that I did from home. So I bought that with my own money and they would not give me my gun back. And so I insisted that they paid me for it, which still kind of felt like they were like sort of stealing from me because like I didn't have a choice whether or not I got the gun back, but I did have a choice on whether or not I got some, a couple $100 from it. And then they also never gave me back my the wedding ring that my grandmother gave me, which still kind of stings because like I don't know, that was like one thing that she specifically told me when she was dying that she wanted me to have. And my mother actually would take the ring sometimes when she would when her wedding ring wouldn't fit. And I remember at one point telling her like, hey, can you like not wear that ring? Because like, that's mine. And I want to make sure that it like stays in good condition. And she just kind of ignored me. So that should have kind of tipped me off before that they weren't exactly respectful of my property, or the fact that I had things that were actually just specifically mine. Anyway, so after they told me that they weren't going to give me my stuff back, I think I spiraled a bit into a dark place and realized that they were never genuinely going to care for me. I don't know why, but that just felt like the last, like you can't even like ship me like a box of my stuff. Like that's how petty we're going to be right now. And so I realized that they kind of had reduced me to just something that was theirs that they wanted back. And I had never felt more like someone's property than I did at that moment. So I know this is probably somewhat controversial, but I actually sent them an email and told them that I was stripping myself of their last name and I disowned them. And so they kept sending me letters and stuff through the mail throughout the years, and they kept sending me like gifts and stuff. And then eventually I think I had moved and they didn't know my new address, so they couldn't contact me anymore. I have been in and out of contact with them over the years, but after not long after I found out that I was pregnant with my son, I decided to just completely cut them off and essentially not look back, because I had already kind of planned on that. Once I knew that once I had a kid, I could no longer interact with that amount of toxicity, because it would just cause tension in the house when it was just me and my husband, because I was so wrapped up in their bullshit. And I was like, I can't bring that kind of energy into my house with my kid. So yeah, so I have not spoken to them in a very long time. But to sort of finish out what was kind of happened with publicly with like the church and stuff, after Marion found out I had disowned my family, he actually sent out another email to my friends again and told them that they needed to remain neutral and like not to support me in what I was doing. So that was really nice. And then after I fully left Heritage and decided that I wasn't going to try to pursue that, Marion made a series of sermons and meetings about single women in the church in his view on how they should live with their fathers. He did probably about, I want to say, 5 different talks about it. And at first they were public, like anyone could go to them, anyone could hear these talks. And then he got some backlash from like a local church community, I think, and he shut it down. And suddenly people weren't able to get the links anymore. And thankfully, I had some friends who had saved the sermons, so I was able to hear them. And I actually recently went over them, and goodness gracious, that was
Yep.
that was a lot.
I've been forwarded those links from your friends.
Yes.
And yeah.
I actually might have 1 or 2 more that I could send to you. I don't know.
Please do. Please do. Yes, please.
Yeah,
we'll make those sermons popular.
Okay, good, because that needs to be, people need to see that.
Yep. We say we make them popular for all the reasons they don't want to be popular.
Yeah. So that was pretty much how Marion handled my specific case, and sort of what that went down with my family. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah, thank you for sharing all of your story. So last 2 concluding questions, same that all of the women in the CPC, at Heritage, and others will be asked. And so the first one is, what would you? So I'll preface this. Before, when you're talking to Marion and others, they can talk back. It's they kind of hold the power. They hold the jurisdiction. They're the authorities in this. But our assumption is when this comes out within a few hours, Heritage, Covenants, and many others will be aware of what's happening and who is talking, and how many people are listening and wondering what's going on at these churches and this micro denomination. So, this question: what would you like to tell those at Covenant Presbyterian Church, or at Covenant Presbyterian Church, the denomination, Heritage, CPC, the particular congregation, and then Marion Lovett? And then what would you like to tell not just them, but people about this denomination and this church and Marion too?
I would first like to talk about the congregation and the church and kind of my views on them. I think that I have a complicated relationship with the congregation. I think there's a lot of good people that have been caught up in bullshit. I think that the church is very much about talking about theology. Like, the church culture is very much, we talk about theology and all the implications, but they do not apply them. The application is just really lacking. They're really good people for surface help. Tornado comes through and destroys stuff on your property. You give them a call, there'll be a bunch of people that show up and help you out. But if you come to them and say, hey, mom drinks too much, or, my dad's beating me or something, they don't know what to do with that. They genuinely just do not know what to do with that. They're in an echo chamber that they don't know that they're in. I used to be one of them, so I can say this with confidence. They stereotype their opposition so much, and they have no idea how much they're stereotyping them. And when they do listen to their opposition, they only listen to refute. That is the only reason I have ever seen or heard anyone listen to anyone that doesn't agree with them. It is just to refute the position. They have their fundamental beliefs that can't be shaken, and they won't look into things. Like, if any of them hear me talk about the whole spanking thing and the fact that it is a form of sexual abuse, I can guarantee you most of them, if not all of them, none of them will actually look into it. No. And that is on them, that they are abusing their children to that extent, and they're doing it out of ignorance, willful ignorance.
Yeah, they wouldn't even say, they would, it's hard to cut you off, but we've been told this so many times that it's not abuse. It's just it's not even proper. It's biblical, and as long as it's biblical, there's no way it could be abuse.
Exactly. The
Which I would disagree that it's biblical. I
you
would
don't,
vehemently disagree that it's biblical, but they've convinced themselves,
I would also
and therefore there's no arguing.
Yeah, I would also disagree. I don't think that it's biblical at all.
Yep.
Especially spanking them on the bottom. That
Yep.
I don't think that's even clearly written out in scripture that you're supposed to beat your
Yeah.
kids in the butt.
It's they talk about sparing the rod,
Yes.
and if they actually knew what a rod was,
Yeah.
they wouldn't they wouldn't be saying this.
Right. So I would say there are two specific, more serious critiques that I have for Heritage, which is, honestly, their money. They have a giant church building that they have erected in Coble, and that thing is fucking ornate. It's huge, it's gorgeous, it's unnecessary. Just across the hill from that church was the property that I used to live on, and on that property were two trailer homes stuck together by a little like halfway room. I feel like that picture shows a lot of how Heritage is with their money and the people in the congregation. There are a lot of rich folks there that build themselves really grand houses and stuff. And we live in a poor county. Like Hickman County is a poor county. There's a homeless man that I'm pretty sure lives on the square, and he sleeps on a bench, and I've never seen anyone try to help him. There's another man that walks to work every day, and he has a limp, and he walks for miles to get to his job, and I've never seen anyone from Heritage offer him a ride to get up the giant hill in Centerville. Their community outreach is pretty much non-existent, and I would say that if it was existent, that the community would be bragging about it. There would be people, when I bring up Heritage to people who don't go there, they should be like, oh, I know about Heritage. They helped me and my family when we couldn't afford gas, or, they helped me when we couldn't afford groceries for our kids, or we couldn't afford formula. They do not provide financial help. And I heard through, mind you, this is secondhand, I heard through the grapevine that apparently if you ask for financial help from the congregation, or from the session, they'll give it to you. But they'll also come to you with a repayment plan. So if anyone from Heritage,
No.
I would like you to go ask the session how many times they asked for a repayment plan for help.
There's no way. Yeah, that's
that is frankly disgusting that was a thing. Also, I'd like to just say that Jesus said to the rich man, he said, one thing you lack, go and sell everything you have and give it to the poor. You will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. At this, the man's face fell. He went away sad because he had great wealth. Jesus said, how hard is it for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven? There are so many rich people there, and there are so many poor people there too. And I know personally girls who have had their electric shut off all the time because they're living they're not even living paycheck to paycheck because their paycheck's not big enough to actually sustain them. It's just, they're so tight-fisted with their generosity. Another thing, and this is definitely a lot more serious, there are several pedophiles in the church. There are actually several pedophiles in the church. I remember when I first started going there for, I think, the second time, there was a young man there, and I noticed him, and I was just like, oh, I don't know who that guy is. And come to find out later, he molested two girls. And he's still allowed to be in contact with the girls that he molested. He's now married and has two children and has a daughter of his own.
Of course.
And as a single woman there who had no protection or anything, I was never once warned. At the very least, they should be warning people, being like, yes, the pedophile sure can come and sit in our congregation, but we're going to tell you that he's a pedophile so you can stay away from him. That's the very, very least they could do.
I hold a rather strict interpretation, and people can hate me for this. I think if you have been convicted of pedophilia, you've lost your right at church. You simply lost your right to attend church. I know that sounds strict, but you've lost it.
No,
because you can't control who's at the church. There's going to be little kids at the church. You've lost your right.
Yeah. There's also another man there who goes exclusively after underage girls, like 17-year-olds, 16, 17-year-olds. And like, that's just common gossip too at the church. Like, I am sure if anyone from Heritage sees this, they know exactly who I'm talking about.
Yep. Of course. And I'm not saying these people are shut up from Christ. Yeah. I'm saying they're not allowed in the larger assembly of God's people. They can have like a private church kind of thing with other pedophiles, or privately at home, or at some house, safe house, whatever it is. But you're not back. You're never allowed back at the church because you. I mean, psychologically, physiologically, there's still some firings there that you can't control.
Yeah. That, and also I would say that especially when it comes to children, the priority of the church should first and foremost be that their children are protected. And if that,
and that was Jesus' priority.
Yes. And if that means that they have to kick out someone from their congregation because they have been historically unsafe to children, then that's what they need to do.
There shouldn't even be a question about it.
Yeah. So that's pretty much most of my qualms with the congregation itself. There's a kind of a variety of people there, so it's hard to kind of pinpoint certain things. But I do have a lot to say about what I think that people should know about Marion. First of all, the man has never met a long prayer that he doesn't like. There was a recording that I listened to, and his opening prayer was, I believe, 6 minutes long. And I would just like to also point out that Jesus said, "And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like the pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father already knows what you need before you ask him." If anything, that should be a red flag that your pastor's doing long prayers when Jesus specifically said don't do that. Anyway, something that he really likes to do is he likes to add to scripture. He likes to create theological arguments by stretching the narrative and adding tiny details to kind of like bolster his claims. And then also ignoring the verses that could potentially contradict what he's saying. He did that a lot in his meetings and his talks about single women in the church. This is a small thing, and my husband specifically asked that I mention this because he's a bit of a language nerd. But Marion had claimed that, and this was one of his reasons why he justified why women need to live with either a husband or a father, was he said that woman was the word woman, its root origin was a derivative of the word man, which according to my husband, who's again a language nerd, he says that that's categorically not true.
Is he talking about the Hebrew or the Greek?
He said any language, actually.
Okay. Because Greek, that's not true. In Hebrew, there's technicalities that you could argue it. But I mean, Greek for certain is not true.
Yeah.
It's andros and gune are the two. Andros is man, and there's a few other words. And then there's gune, which is wife, woman, mom, something like that.
Well, he had.
Tell me if you hear any similarity in those two words.
None, actually. He had said specifically, he's like he does not know of a single language that the word for man is not the root word for woman. Um,
Yeah.
and the
I
first thing that popped into
doesn't
my
know what
head,
he's talking about.
I,
Yeah.
I speak a little bit of German, and the first thing that popped into my head was the word for man in German is just man, and the word for woman is Frau. I don't,
Isn't it Menschenfrau? I
yeah.
think.
So I was
Yeah.
listening to the thing, and I was the meeting, and I stopped and I texted my husband. I'm like, you know more about language than me. Is this true? And he's like, no,
Yeah.
that's just not
Even Latin. I was thinking Latin is vir is man, and then femina is female or woman.
true. Yeah. So anyway, he uses really small things like that, and it seems like a really small, like innocent mistake to make. But he just
Yeah.
sprinkles those things throughout his talks.
And it
And
sounds smart. It sounds profound. It sounds incredible. And some people were just like, oh, of course, yeah. That's if our pastor says it. It sounds great. It sounds right. So I guess that's what it is.
and people they don't seem to really push back on things like that, which is really funny.
Hmm.
Anyway, he sprinkles that stuff in, and it just kind of it changes the narrative of the Bible when you do that. Because you can twist that thing to say anything you want if you keep sprinkling stuff in like that. And then also it's just dangerous because you're basing fundamental beliefs on vague interpretations, and just incorrect things. And it's just irresponsible to preach that from the pulpit for something that's that important, because he says that it's that important. And going on to his views on women, he says that a woman's identity, purpose, role, design are inseparable from a man, whether that is her father or her husband. He said that her salvation is tied to them, and he specifically said that a woman's relation to a man is a salvific issue. So,
Okay, I didn't. Yeah, I had to take a second to take that in because that is bold. You don't
yeah,
normally hear that from patriarchs, but that is bold.
he said so he says that, and I just would like to point out a few verses. Jesus talks about the kingdom of heaven, and he says that he is the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to the Father except through him. How is Marian's worldview and his teachings not heretical? Like, that is heretical to say that a woman's salvation is tied to a man, whether it's her father or her husband. Jesus also says there is one God, one mediator, also between God and man, the Christ Jesus. Actually, sorry, that was Timothy, not Jesus. And Jesus also says, very truly, I tell you, whoever hears my words and believes him who sent me has eternal life and will not be judged, but has crossed over from death to life. Nowhere in there do you see an earthly father or an earthly husband mentioned. This is talking about Jesus and your relation to Jesus and God, and there's no one in between. We're not Catholics. We don't need an earthly mediator like that. Also, Jesus says, truly I tell you, no one who has left home or brother or sister or mother or father or children or fields for me and the gospel will fail to receive 100 times as much in this present age. Homes, brothers, sisters, mothers, children, and fields in this age and the age to come. And I have to say that from my own personal experience, that is actually true.
Yeah, absolutely. Jesus says it from the cross too. To say, hey, what about your brother and your mother? And he looks at his brother or mother and looks at the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Or no, that's not from the cross. This is one of the houses that he's at. And says, if you do the will of my Father, you are my brother and sister and mother and friend.
Yes. Yeah. And since getting out, I have a family now. Like, not just my husband and like my in-laws and stuff like that, and my kid, but like I have people in my life that are my family. They are my brothers and they're my sisters. And I have mothers and fathers. I've gotten it back. And
more so than what you had too. Yep.
Yes. Anyway, so he claims that Marion has claimed that a woman has never lived outside the context of a father or husband. I would like to bring up Esther lived in the context of her uncle. Ruth lived under the headship of her mother-in-law. And I'm pretty sure that Paul mentions several women outside the context of a man.
Phoebe in Romans 16, Priscilla and Aquila.
Yes.
You've got Hagar in Genesis 15 and 16. Yeah, I could keep going on the woman outside of the context of a man, but I will stop.
Yeah. And also, I feel like if this was a salvific issue, if it was truly a salvific issue, it would be clearly spelled out in Scripture that this is a way a woman is saved, or at least that her salvation is secure, or whatever it is.
Yeah. You have one single issue for salvation, and it is believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you shall be saved.
Yes,
that's it.
Yes. He also specifies that there is no age limit to living if you're a single woman and living outside your father's house. He said it doesn't matter if it's a young woman or a child or an old woman.
I know where he's going with this.
Yeah. And then he said there was exceptions. There are exceptions because in that meeting he pointed out two girls that were at the church. One was training to be a midwife, and the other one, I remember she was training to be a doula, and I think she was also just there to help with the pro-life stuff. I can't remember exactly what her thing was, but he called them the exception of the exception on why they weren't living with their fathers, and they were just alone in heritage. And then when people are like, hey, what are these exceptions? Like, can you spell them out? He then was pretty much just like, well, the father has to pray to God and ask him and will be shown the way. That was essentially his answer. So the vaguest thing possible. Right. Which also another thing is that, like, I know of I believe two young women who were given the blessing of their father to live in Coble or Centerville outside of him, and Marion refused to take them in. Actually, he told them they weren't allowed to move there, which I think is funny because it's like, you don't own Coble or Centerville. You can't tell people they're not allowed to move to your town. Like, so he doesn't even like follow his own like prescription on what the exception is, because he ignores a father's blessing if he doesn't think that he wants it. Or he actually said to that same father that he couldn't take in any more single young women in the church, and that they had too many. Which at the time I think they had 3. So, and I also don't see anywhere in the Bible where you say, I'm sorry, I have too many people who need me, and I can't help you anymore as an elder. And also I can say with a lot of confidence that he didn't do anything for these women who he believed were the exception of the exception. He tattled on one of them to their dad about something that the dad already knew, and that was about the extent of it. I don't ever remember him providing financial help for these girls. I don't remember him ever, coming and talking with them and just, making sure that they feel safe in the church. He didn't do any of that. He also said, in regards to if a woman leaves because of like abuse and stuff, he said that, and I believe in the context of that, he told them to not air their dirty laundry out to anyone outside the church.
Yeah.
And he said that he claimed that if you don't know all the details of an abuse situation in an area like that we are not supposed to be agents of justice on the internet. And that it would be spreading gossip. And then he also said that I quote, need to be contained, that the information needs to be contained to the church. And I would like to point out that in Ephesians it says, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of the darkness, but rather expose them. So I think we are supposed to talk.
Yeah. Not to mention, the qualifications for an elder in both Timothy and Titus both describe an elder as somebody who's looked well upon by outsiders, those who are outside the household of faith.
Yes.
So if you're either A, not known, or not well liked because of how you've handled some of these situations, you have lost one of the qualifications, a pretty big one for elder.
Yes, I would very much agree. He when talking about single women, he wanting to leave their father's house, he would always talk about he would first bring up like how she just wanted to be out from underneath authority and out from underneath maleness. That was always his first talking point, which is you just want to rebel. Instead of being like, oh, there could be something wrong going on here. It was immediately shifting the blame onto the victim. And I think that that's really dangerous rhetoric to be putting out into your congregation, that it feels like it's programming them to immediately be suspicious of anyone who comes forward who says, I've been hurt. He's also, I've heard him talk before about, he told children from the pulpit that he didn't want to hear them complain about their parents to him. He really has this he really seems to be trying to build this culture of just silencing people who are at the very bottom rung of society, into just not saying anything. And personally, this is just my own personal opinion, but I think he knows that what he's doing is wrong. And I think that that's why he's doing it. I think that this is actually something he's doing on purpose. And I think that that's very concerning. And that's not a man that you should want to have the state of your soul be like in care of. He also, this was an interesting thing. I was listening to the meetings, and he takes a stronger stance on women living outside of their father's household than he does on the commandment to not make graven images. There was a very specific part in one of the meetings where he had mentioned about something about not having graven images, and a man stood up from the congregation and said, well, I think that it's okay to essentially have an image of Jesus, like portrayed. And then Marion disagreed with him and was like, no, I still think that that's a graven image. But he dismissed it. The man was never publicly like shamed or told that his membership was in jeopardy because of it. He wasn't excommunicated for what, according to Marion's theology, would be idolatry. So he has more. He cares more about single women staying in their house, which is an interpretation that he has, that his own personal interpretation of certain biblical passages, but on a very specific passage that talks about not having graven images, he's like, well, to each his own type of thing. That's also very concerning. I feel like that's a big red flag for anyone who is in Heritage or who would want to visit Heritage. He had talked about how the reason why women need to stay under their father's house, under their father's roof, is because of a covenantal living. They need to be in covenant and stuff. And then he used the same exact language with single young men, but he never said that single young men have to live in the context of their father's household, or until they get married. And there are several single young men who are at the church who don't live with their parents, and are seen as very valued and respectable members of the community. Never once heard him publicly talk about how that was wrong. And so I think the double standard is kind of gross. And also I personally would be interested to see how many men at Heritage would stick around if the same rule applied to them. Because I don't think they would. I think they would leave. And I think that they would think they were justified in leaving too. But it's funny how when the girls leave, suddenly we're angry feminists who are just trying to get away from maleness. Another thing that I would say about Marion is his view on membership and his rules about communion are just completely made up, essentially. First of all, paperwork membership, like being on the rolls, is just a made up concept. That's nowhere in the Bible. You don't see the concept of you're a member of a local church like that in the Bible anywhere, unless I'm wrong, but I don't see it anywhere. But he puts so much on membership. Like he kind of does the same salvific thing as far as being under the roof of your father. He said that that there's only two reasons why people leave the church, and one is excommunication and the other is apostasy. And he was saying this in the context of people asking to remove themselves from the roles of his church. So it wasn't like oh, if you leave the general church at large. It was if you leave my local church type of thing. It's excommunication or apostasy. And if you remove yourself from the roles, he views it as a form of excommunication without due process. He said that specifically. And I think that is to conflate church membership with spiritual protection and stuff like that is, again, a way that I think he adds to the scriptures in order to scare people. And also a way for him to just kind of add arbitrary hoops in front of people to jump through in order to get them to do what he wants them to do, or to drive them out of the community. Because I feel like that's what he did with me. I think he just kept putting hoops in front of me as far as membership, just to scare me out of the community. And speaking of scaring people out, he outright said that fear is a good atmosphere for the growth of a church. And that the reason for communion is to essentially instill fear. The reason why they do the reason they do have communion every week is in order to instill fear, to make sure that people have short accounts and that they essentially seek forgiveness for things that they've done during the week. He also stated that it is not the prerogative of a husband or a father or even an individual to refrain from taking communion. He said that is a decision that needs to be made by leadership, which would like to point out that the Bible says everyone ought to examine themselves before eating and drinking in the context of communion. I don't see anywhere in the scriptures where it says that is a job of the elders to examine your heart. So again, I think he just continues to add to scripture. He also said that he would stop visitors and ask in the middle of communion and ask them about their membership status and their baptism and things like that. And he said that he knows that it made people feel uncomfortable and was kind of a fearful thing. And again, going back to the fact that he said that fear is a good atmosphere to grow a church. 1 John says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment, and one who fears is not perfected in love." And Timothy says, "For God has not given us the spirit of fear, but of power and love and of sound mind." So again, I think that his claim of fear being a good thing in the church, I think that is also heretical. And I think that people who are visiting or who live there should be concerned with that kind of language that he's using around communion. He also said that illness is a sign of judgment for taking communion the wrong way, which I don't necessarily have a particular stance about that. But what I would say is that there are a lot of chronically ill people in his congregation. I was one of them. And never once did he ever come to me and say, hey, I know you're chronically ill, and I'm not trying to assume anything, but would you like to talk about the state of your soul? Because you're just getting sicker and sicker with each Sunday. He never once asked me that, and I've never heard of him ever asking any chronically ill person in his church that either. It's really sad for me to think of that, because I have friends in there who are sick, and I know that they've heard that message.
Yep.
And I know the kind of stress that they're under, as far as the state of their soul, because of the.
It's also what Job's friends assumed of Job, that you must have sinned for all these boils and leprosy and all of this stuff that has happened to your family. When we know what happened to his family because of Job 1 and 2, wasn't because of his sin.
Yes. Also, there's the man who was blind. I believe Jesus says that it wasn't necessarily
John 7. Or no, John 9. Sorry, John 9. Was it because of his or his parents' sin that he was born blind, which is what the Pharisees and scribes ask him? And Jesus says it was neither. It was for the glory of the Son of God to come and heal him.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And and to put that kind of stress on people who are already ill, being like, oh, by the way, every time you wake up in the morning and have a headache, just know that might be because you're just a terrible person. And the sad thing is that a lot of the times people who have that type of illness, and like the type of illness I had, is due to stress because the people around them are actually the ones who are sinning towards them. When I got out and I finally kind of cut out some of the last of the toxic people out of my life, my seizures went away within, I want to say, 4 months. And I never had another one since. I think that's very telling of the kind of environment I was in. That my body and my mind were so stressed out that I was convulsing uncontrollably for hours on end, multiple times a month. Anyway, also, I think the way that Marion handles abuse is just uneducated. He said, and I quote, we are not going to jump on the Marxist feminist bandwagon that everyone is abusive and everyone is abused. And I would just like to point out that abuse is sin. And from what I remember being in those circles, they believed that everyone sinned and everyone fell short of the glory of God. And abuse is simply the use of something to have a bad effect or a bad purpose on someone. It's just a misuse of something. It's to treat someone with cruelty or violence, especially on a repeated or regular basis. And to say that doesn't happen to everyone when you also believe in the concept of like total depravity, just does not equal up to me. I don't see how you can justify those two things. He said that he's been standing in the way of domestic violence for over 25 years. That was his claim. And I have personally witnessed there was 2 girls in the church who I knew were being physically harmed by someone in their family. And Marion knew about it, and never once did I see him stand in the way of those girls being hurt. In fact, my husband and I had to try to figure out how we were going to take legal action against the person harming, especially because one of the girls was a minor at the time. We were getting together and trying to figure out, well, how do we bring this to the police? How do we get proof? How do we do X, Y, Z? Because Marion would not protect these girls, even though there were bruises on these girls. And Marion did not step in to do anything about it. There was at least bruises on one of the girls, and it was the minor. And he did not do anything about it. So he also, which is funny because he also describes abuse as only being physical. He specifically stated that biblical abuse is only physical. And then he claims that emotional, mental, and spiritual abuses are not real abuses. And then he also said that he said not to ask his wife and his daughters about their lives because they could chalk up every moment of their lives that have gone wrong to mental, emotional, and spiritual abuse. And then he tried to take it back later, but still, he said it. And I think that's really concerning. And I would just like to point out that spiritual abuse is very much in the Bible. Like, you can see that. I think that was one of the things that Jesus was most angry about when he was here on earth, was the fact that there was spiritual abuse going on. In fact, the only time I recall Jesus ever getting physically violent with people was because they were being abused, I believe, on a spiritual level, also like on a financial level too, but because someone was using religious beliefs to intimidate and to hurt and isolate people. And I think that, and to take their money. And I think that that is a form of spiritual abuse. And the fact that Marion can't recognize that, I personally think that means that he should kind of do some self-reflection on maybe he is that person who's doing the spiritual abuse. And I would say one of the proofs that I would have that he's spiritually abusive is he said he did not tell his congregation or ask them if they wanted to go down the path of talking about whether or not those 3 types of abuses were actually legitimate abuses. He said very firmly that they were not going down that path to talk about those things. And I would say that if you are telling your congregation that they cannot have a conversation about a specific subject, that's controlling. And I think that's a misuse of his power and position. And I think that is spiritual abuse in action. To go up there in the pulpit and to be like, no, you can't, I'm sorry, you can't talk about this thing because I said so, because I'm your leader. That's a form of spiritual abuse. I don't think he understands what abuse is. I don't think he understands. I don't think he gets what it means for someone to get hurt by the church or hurt by people. That isn't something that's like a bruise. And even then, like I said before, that doesn't matter to him either. He said that in order for a church to support someone coming out of an abusive situation, they have to have proof. But then he also says that that you're not supposed to share things with outside the church. He also says that you're not really supposed to share things with the congregation because that's gossip. So I would like to just ask, if a girl has no proof, or not just a girl, anyone, if anyone has no proof that they're being abused, but they are being abused, because things like that happen in secret all the time. The sexual abuse is one thing that is really hard to prove sometimes. So if a girl or a guy is being sexually abused by their parent or by someone in their house, and they've got no proof, they can't go to the church, they can't go outside the church, and they can't leave their house without being ostracized by the community, then what are they supposed to do? Where is their path of safety? Marion gives no path of safety to anyone in a situation where they can't provide proof. And I think that is against what it is to be an elder at a church. That is against what it is to be a religious person, I think. To be a Christian, I think we're supposed to be looking after the defenseless and the oppressed. And that is very, very clearly written out in scripture that you're supposed to do that. I don't see the Bible talking about how, oh, well, you need to make sure that you have proof that someone got hurt in order to, show them kindness or compassion or support. You don't have to always punish the abuser in order to support and help the abused. And I think that Marion can't separate those two things in his mind. I think he sees it as, well, I'm arm of the law pretty much, and I just gotta whack someone over the head. And if I don't have proof, I can't do it. And so that's the only thing I'm really good for, because he doesn't provide safety. I've never seen him provide shelter for a girl. I've never seen him provide financial compensation for her. Nothing like that. So I think that his the reason why he's like that is because he thinks that he only has one job when it comes to abuse, is to just punish someone. And so if he can't punish the person who is victimizing the person, he has to punish the victim. He's just created such an unsafe environment in his church for abuse. There are a lot more stories I could tell, but they're not my stories to tell. And I know that was kind of a long and rabbit traily rant about Marion, but I think that those were important things for people to know. Sorry, it wasn't super concise.
No, it's okay. So before I ask the last question, talk to Marion. If you want to talk to him very specifically. Talk to him and on the last question.
Personally, I think that there is nothing I could say to Marion that could get him to change his mind.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it takes an immense amount of courage and humility for someone in his position of power to actually self-reflect. Yes. So I think that there's only one real thing that I could say to him, which is, woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees to deprave the poor of their rights and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people. Woe to you, teacher of the law and Pharisee, you hypocrite! You give a tenth of your spices, but you neglect the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You blind guide, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. On the outside, you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside, you are full of hypocrisy and wickedness. For the weak you have not strengthened, the sick you have not healed, the injured you have not bound up, and the strayed you have not brought back. The lost you have not sought, and with force and harshness you have ruled them. So the only thing I have to say to Marion is shame on you. Shame on you. And I think that your congregation is the only thing that's giving you power. So I would like to say something to the congregation specifically, which is that they have so much to gain recognizing his abuse and breaking out of his control. And I understand that I am not palatable to the people at Heritage. Fully recognize that. I have blue hair, I have tattoos, I have piercings, and I know they don't like the way I dress. But I really hope that my appearance won't discredit my testimony. So I think that I would like to ask Heritage how many victims have to come forward to have an investigation, to warrant an investigation. How many more people have to get hurt in order for this to be stopped? Because I already know of 3 girls, myself included, who have come forward about all this. That's more than 2 witnesses. And I would just encourage them to not discredit these witnesses because they don't necessarily approve of how they got out or who they married or what they did. There's just Heritage seems to like to spread the narrative that they are truth seekers. And so I would just say that if you truly believe that you are truth seekers and you truly believe that your church has nothing to hide, then you should go with confidence and search out and investigate these claims. Because if you're 100% confident, you will find nothing. Worst case scenario, though, you find something and you have to deal with it. So I suppose I want to ask, where is your level of courage at? And do you have any? People at Heritage will post memes. They will bash people on the internet. They will talk about the libtards and the feminists and the Baptists. They really like to talk about how much they don't like the Baptists. And they will point out any other church's speck in their eye and be like, look at that. Haha, that's funny. They're messed up. But they will not look at the log in the eye of their own church. And I think that if you are going to point the finger and laugh at anyone, you should be doing it at your own church first before you go and point it at other churches. I would say be like Jesus. Jesus condemns abusive religious leaders. He flips tables and whips people because of it. And when Marion stood up there and said that his wife and daughter could chalk up every minute of their existence to emotional, mental, and spiritual abuse, and not a single man stood up in the middle of that meeting and went, hold on, can you please maybe stop for a second and explain yourself? That was so disappointing. Those men are failures. They have a chance to actually fix that. But right now, they're failures for not mentioning that, for not publicly calling Marion out and being like, that is wrong. What you just said was wrong, or at the very least concerning. But if you listen to those meetings, they'll call Marion out for other things that have nothing to do with the gravity of the situation when it comes to abuse. They'll nitpick the finer details of the theology, but they won't actually talk about shit like this. I would also like to say that just note how many rules Marion puts on people. Jesus says to take up my yoke and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Y'all hold tighter to your theological dogmas than you stand for the oppressed. Your emphasis in your life is grossly misplaced. When you are arguing about whether or not the Trinity is like a 3 clover whatever, or if it's like an egg or whatever, and you go into big debates about that for a long time, you are wasting your breath on that. You should be talking about the abuse in your church. You should be talking about the girls who have left and who had to scrape to get by. I was almost homeless at one point because I couldn't get into any of the rentals in the town because there is a man in Heritage who owns almost all of the nice places that you can rent it at that is affordable in Centerville. And I don't specifically have proof, but I am pretty darn sure that I was blacklisted from getting a home because he did not like me. I was a woman who was in need of shelter, and I was willing to pay for it, and I was denied. I think that y'all need to really think about that. I'd also like to say there's this really good quote from, if anyone knows Good Mythical Morning, one of their hosts, his name is Rhett, and he said, your kids are not leaving the church because you didn't train them enough. Your kids are leaving the church because you trained them well enough to develop a sense of justice and truth. You let them read the words of Jesus and they got it. And they recognize that the church doesn't seem interested in those words. They're not leaving because they don't know the truth. They're leaving because they do. And I can say that I'm pretty sure almost all of the girls that have left, that is accurate. Yep. They did read the words of Jesus and they realized that they were not getting Jesus from Heritage, not from the people and not from Marion. I would encourage anyone from Heritage to read the story about the Good Samaritan. And then I would encourage them to ask themselves who they are in that story and who their leaders are in that story. Are they the priest and the Levite that look at the person who is battered and bruised on the side, and do they turn around and leave? Do they pass by and leave? Or are they actually the Good Samaritan who asks for no explanation of how the man got there? He did not ask for membership. He didn't require money. He did not require anything from that man. Instead, he picked him up and he helped him. And he offered support and he offered healing. He didn't ask where the man came from. He didn't ask if the man did anything wrong. He just saw someone that was hurt and he helped him. In Isaiah, it says to learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless, and plead for the widow. And I would encourage the people at Heritage to go and do likewise. Sorry, I'm about to cry.
I'll give you a moment.
I just remember feeling such hope when I thought about Heritage before I got out, because I thought for sure that if any one of them heard even a smidgen of what I was going through, that they would rally around me in an instant and help me. And instead, when I went there, I was met with suspicion. I was met with ostracization. I was pushed out of that church. And if anyone wants to know how I got to this, how I am now more liberal, and how I don't believe in the things that they believe in anymore, I just want them to reflect on the fact that they kicked me out. They did not welcome me. They were not opening their arms and being like Jesus to me. And they weren't doing it for these other girls too.
Yeah, I'd argue, like you said, I think that quote is perfect. I think you took Jesus seriously.
I have never taken Jesus more seriously than I do now, I think.
Yep.
And I would like to say that I think that if any of the people at Heritage knew what I believed in right now, they would call me a heretic. And they would say that I apostatized. But I can say that I think that I understand Jesus now more than I ever did when I was with them, because they never demonstrated Jesus. But I have seen so many people outside of Heritage who have been that to me. They have been a Christ-like figure to me. And it was not the people you expected. It was the people whose appearance was a little bit different. It was the people who said things that you don't like. But they were the kindest people to me. And I actually married one of them because he was so nice. There was another question. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, no, the last one. If you can talk to those women who were in your shoes, or are in your shoes, or are wondering if were in your shoes, Heritage or wherever else they may be, who are thinking, can I speak out? How do I speak out? What do I do? If you can talk to them.
I would say, first of all, about 4.5 years ago, I am exactly where you all are right now. I felt stuck. I felt powerless. I didn't know what to do. I was told God would be against me if I did anything. I had health issues. I was miserable. I was so miserable. I was so depressed. And I would just like to say first that does not have to be your story. You can get out and you can be free of all of that. There is actual peace and there is comfort outside of that misery you're living in right now. I would first say that look into your theology. See where the things that these men are telling you that is keeping you oppressed, see where that stuff came from. See where that originated. Because I can guarantee you most of that was from people trying to just be in control. I would also say that to show yourself compassion in this moment, because you're in a moment of extreme hurt and extreme fear, and not everyone's going to like how you react, but I think you should show compassion to yourself. The second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that if you believe that, then that means you have to believe that you have to have some measure of compassion for yourself. And I think if you have that level of compassion for yourself, I would highly encourage you to reach out to anyone to help you. I offer myself up. I have public Instagram and Facebook accounts. If anyone needs help, honestly, especially if you're at Heritage, but anyone, DM me. Just contact me. If you don't know how to explain yourself, you don't know how to explain the abuse that you've been in, you can just say, I saw your podcast and I'll take the help and I will know what you mean and we will get the ball rolling. I have helped other people get out. I'm confident that I can help you get out. I don't expect any explanation. I don't need to know your story. I genuinely don't. If you do not want to share it, you don't have to tell me. But if you do, I am here for you. but first and foremost, I want you to be safe. And there is a community of people who will welcome you with open arms, who actually care about you. And so I'd say that getting out is really hard. I'm not going to lie. It was one of the hardest things I have ever done in my life. But it is so worth it. My life right now is so good, I can't even comprehend it. Almost every day I look at my husband and I'm like, oh my God, our life is good. I live in a house that I own. I have a husband and a child. I have peace and safety every single day. And that is possible. So I would just say to not hesitate to seek help. And I would also like to say, if you're my mom listening to this, I'll help you too. If you realize that what dad did to you was wrong and that he's continuing to put you down, and you recognize that he has absolutely destroyed your spark, I'm here for you and I will help you. It will be really difficult, but I will help you. You might have to find a different way to contact me because I've blocked you on a lot of things. But I know you can get in contact with me. You can find a way and I will help you. And I would just like to say to anyone who hears the rhetoric of you have to essentially be the perfect victim in order to seek safety, I would point you to Jesus and how he took care of the woman who was caught in adultery. He looked at the men around her who were about to stone her and said to not do that. He made them go away. He brought her into safety first, and then he said, go and sin no more. He did not go up to her and say, are you going to keep sinning? Because if you are, I'm going to let them cast those stones on you. Do you have proof that you're not going to keep sinning? He did not say any of that. He simply said, go and sin no more, after he brought her into safety. And I think that you need to remember that that is how Jesus wanted people to act. He wants you to receive the kind of love and support that he gives to other people. And I think that you're worth it.